Right then, welcome back to Eye On Sports. Tennis Jamaica recently held their first election in 3 years, and businessman John Azar was elected unopposed to serve for the next cycle. Azar replaces Answorth Morgan, who withdrew from the presidential race just after the nominations were done. Now, with the victory, Azar, who is a tennis enthusiast as well, he has a completely new slate to help him run local tennis. Let's welcome new president of Tennis Jamaica, John Azar, back to Eye On Sports.
Thank you,
John,
sir.
the last time you were here, you were candidate Azar. Now you are President Azar.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Sherman.
How does it feel to have won the election, to now be at the helm of Tennis Jamaica, first and foremost?
Feels good. I'm excited about it. The opportunities are there. There are challenges. But again, I think we're going in the right direction already. The executive officers are in place after the election. There's a little hiccup as relating to the remaining members of the board being elected on the night, but I'm feeling good.
Yeah. All right. What are your immediate objectives? Because we know you have maybe a slew of plans, but in terms of the immediate one or immediate ones, what would those be?
It's tough to prioritize because, as I think I mentioned to you before, there is a lot to be done. But I think that raising funds is going to be very important to be able to grow the sport. Emphasis on the grassroots program, the 10 and under program in the schools, hosting more events, bring international tennis back to Jamaica, international senior events, improving membership, communication with the members of the organization, and the overall transparency within which the organization operates. Yeah. I want that to be paramount. So I'm a firm believer that with transparency is far less likelihood of any controversy.
Yeah. Speaking of transparency, let's get into a few things. First of the election process, the executive members have been elected. However, the directors were not elected on the night. There are 9 directors?
9 directors.
9 directors. What's the process now to have that aspect of the election process out of the way?
All right, just to give a very quick background, there were, as you said, the 6 executives were elected, 5 unopposed and 1 which an actual election took place for.
Right.
Read the directors, there are 6 Kingston-based directors and 3 out-of-town directors.
Right.
Now, the previous administration had asked the Jamaica Olympic Association to oversee the election process,
right.
And on the night they felt that there was something a little bit improper with the nomination process for the director positions.
Right.
So on their advice, they suggested that the voting continue for the executive, but be postponed for the director position. So we have reached out to the JOA. We have a meeting scheduled with them, I believe, for Monday morning, which is the earliest they could accommodate us. And obviously we would like to get the full board in place as quickly as possible. So we've sought legal guidance directly, and we'll meet with the JOA, consult with them, get their views on the advice we've been given, and hopefully that can be out of the way in the shortest possible time. There's business to be done, and without the full board to take certain decisions, clearly we're at a slight disadvantage, for sure.
And speaking of getting things done and staying on the issue of transparency, we understand that the Davis Cup team and the Davis Cup competition, which is the premier tournament for local tennis, that the responsibility to select that team was handed over to the Russell Academy by the previous administration. And since you've come in, you've realized, or you found that out. How do you feel about that, and how will you go about treating that particular issue?
It's a difficult question for a number of reasons. I'd heard of it loosely prior to the AGM. On the night, the concern was raised by a former national player who was in attendance, and there's a vibrant discussion around it. That's where I was getting a little bit more educated at the same time when other members were. What I would say to you is the new administration is going to have to take a look at whatever contractual arrangements were signed that we would have inherited, and we'll take a look at it keenly. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Mr. Richard Russell, who was appointed Davis Cup coordinator, and his son Ryan, who is a coach / non-playing captain. Like them both, lot of respect for them. But again, we want to take a look at the optics of it and just ensure that for a national team being selected, that the processes are correct and the processes are as much as possible in keeping with practices of years past.
Because if the entire responsibility for the Davis Cup team is handed over to the Russell Academy, this would mean that the selection of the team itself wouldn't be under the auspices of Tennis Jamaica. In terms of going about that particular, is that an aspect that you would want to look at directly?
Certainly I would, and I'll tell you why. I think that when it's a national representation, I think that all times the National Association has to play a large part in the selection of a national team. So the question was raised at the AGM. It was slightly ambiguous response. In one sense, as though the captain would have the final responsibility, and then the outgoing secretary made it clear that while he could make a recommendation, the board of Tennis Jamaica would have to ratify that decision. So I'm not dodging your question at all. It is, I don't want to say it's a concern at this point yet, but having heard the concern raised at the AGM, it certainly is very, very high on the agenda of the new executive and the new board once they are elected to look at this critically and ensure that it stands the scrutiny test. Just the optics of it, we need to make sure it is what it should be.
Is there any other aspect of it that you want to address immediately?
Any other aspect of what?
That agreement between Tennis Jamaica, the previous administration, and Russell Academy?
Well, again, I'm not really even privy to all the facts surrounding that as yet.
Right.
But I can tell you, in speaking to other members of the executive, having heard the concerns on the night, it is certainly something that will get our immediate attention. Yeah. And this, to be very clear, is not against any of the players who have been selected to the squad. It certainly is not anything against Richard Russell, who I have the highest respect for, and his academy. But at the end of the day, Tennis Jamaica, for a period of years, has used a certain selection criteria for all national teams. Right. And when you deviate from that, if adequate notice isn't given and if persons are not informed as they should be, then you run the risk of running into a number of pitfalls. And we certainly don't want to get started on that premise.
By the way, the previous president, Aswad Morgan, gave you his full support on the night in respect to saying that he will continue to be involved and he'd help in any way asked. One issue, not necessarily issue, but a goal of his was to build a tennis academy and so on. And you had pointed out at the AGM post after winning that there are no monies in place just yet, no funding in place just yet for that exquisite plan. What's the latest on that, and is that something that you will prioritize?
Well, again, he's promised to meet with me in the coming days to go through those plans. I certainly have seen nothing yet more than what was presented to the membership. I will say within the first 30 seconds of my acceptance speech, if you call it that, I reached out to him, made it very clear we want his support and his knowledge. But yet, I do think the plan is fantastic. If somebody talks about building a world-class tennis facility to host events, that's incredible. Big thing for the sport, but clearly it's going to take money to build. Now, his view was that once a memorandum of understanding has been signed, it would be easier to raise funds, and that may well be true. So I asked him on the night, which I didn't say tongue-in-cheek, I meant genuinely, if and when that's signed, I'd certainly welcome his efforts in raising those funds, alongside our new team, of course, because he seems to feel that raising the $100 million he says it would require is not that difficult, and clearly that's a fair sum of money.
Yeah. And finally, as you speak of money, how will you go about addressing what seems to be the poor financial standing of Tennis Jamaica at this point in time? Because funding right across the board is an issue, but how do you intend to address that?
I think that we've seen positive signs already. I mean, a few corporate sponsors have reached out to me just since the AGM. As I think I mentioned before, and I'm a firm believer of, if the brand is strong, if the sport of tennis is seen in a positive light, it's attracting persons, corporate sponsors are going to want to be associated with it. And I did mention on the night, but I'll say it again, from my perspective and any of the brands that I represent, starting of course with the King Alarm brand, King Alarm will be stepping up to sponsor local tennis, because I cannot go knocking on the doors of corporate Jamaica asking them to believe in a brand that I'm not demonstrating I believe in myself.
You don't want to sound any alarms, right?
No, definitely not so early on.
All right. John Azar, the new president of Tennis Jamaica, thank you so very much for joining us here on Eye On Sports, and we'll definitely be following right throughout your tenure.
Pleasure again, Jeremy. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so we have some events to come as well. So we take a break and we come back. When we come back, we're going to be looking at the issue of involving Caster Semenya. Soon come.